I had not come to Thornwall for her. I had come because a number did not add up. 17 supply cycles, and the outer wolves on the Eastern Circuit had reported better provisioning than the Thornwall ledgers could account for: fewer cold weather losses, stronger morale through the bitter months, a consistency that the warden's reports did not explain. My steward had flagged it as a clerical error. My logistics marshal had called it rounding. I had said nothing and come myself, because in 17 years of rule I had learned that the things no one can explain are usually the most important things on the page. I arrived after the 9th hour. The supply road was empty, the courtyard quiet, and the packhouse hall was dark. Not entirely dark. A lamp burned somewhere in the back corridor, a single amber thread under a door that, by the floor plan I carried, led to the provisions workroom. The warden's quarters were on the upper floor. The hall staff would have been released at dusk. There was no reason for a lamp to be burning at this hour in the back workroom of a mid-territory packhouse that was not expecting its Alpha King until morning. I left my escort at the courtyard gate and walked the corridor alone. The door was not latched. I stood in the gap and looked in. She was seated at the long table with her back to me, a column of figures open before her, a second ledger propped at her left elbow. She was writing in a hand I could see from the doorway was meticulous, small, unhurried script, the kind that costs patience rather than talent. A clay mug sat near her right hand, long cold by the look of it. The lamp was positioned to fall across the page. She had arranged herself entirely for the work, not for comfort. She had not heard me. She was too absorbed. She turned a page, ran a finger down the column, made a small correction, turned back. My wolf went quiet. Not the sudden stillness of threat assessment, not the braced silence before a fight. Something I did not have a word for: a settling, as though a sound I had grown so accustomed to that I had stopped hearing it had simply ceased, and the absence of it was the most restful thing I had known in 17 years. My wolf did not surge toward her. It did not pull. It went still the way a fire goes still when the wind stops, and burned more cleanly for it. I stood in the doorway for longer than I should have. Then she reached for the cold mug without looking, found it cold, set it back with a small sound, not frustration, only acknowledgement, and turned another page. I stepped back into the corridor without announcing myself and walked back to the courtyard gate. My escort captain raised an eyebrow. "There is someone still working in the provisions workroom," I said. "Find out who she is and what her role is. Do not disturb her." Her name was Wren. Rank packhouse keeper, 3rd tier, no designated specialty. No wolf form, which meant she held no formal standing in the hierarchy at all, by the old reckoning. She was not eligible for assignment to anything above maintenance and general supply. She had been stationed at Thornwall for 3 years and 4 months, transferred from a border outpost that had been consolidated. There was no commendation in her file. There was no complaint either. She appeared in the records as a name attached to a room assignment and a standard weekly task list: hearth tending for the East Corridor, general tidying, hall preparation on council nights. That was what the file said. What the file did not say, I began to learn the following morning when I walked the East Wing on my own before the warden rose. The hearths in the East Corridor were not merely tended. They were managed, banked at precise depths that would hold heat through the early patrol return, the kind of thing that takes 3 winters to learn by observation and that no task list specifies. The gate alcove, where the outer wolves came in from the Eastern Circuit cold and tired and too proud to say so, had a covered vessel on the low shelf. I lifted the cloth. Broth, still warm, a ladle, 2 plain cups. No one had put that in a task list. I walked the corridor until I found the supply ledger room, which was different from the provisions workroom. A smaller space, less lamp-worthy, where administrative records were kept. The ledger on the shelf was current. I opened it to the last 3 months of entries and found 2 scripts. The warden's broad, confident hand and a second hand, smaller, entered in the margins and beneath. Corrections, cross-references, a note in the 4th month flagging a discrepancy between the East Wing supply count and the Outer Wolves provisioning receipts. The note had been written 6 weeks ago. It had not been acted on. The warden's hand did not appear beside it. I closed the ledger and went to find my logistics marshal. "The Outer Wolves on the Eastern Circuit," I said. "Who has been keeping their provisioning records accurate?" He gave me a look that said he did not know what I meant. Pull their cold weather loss reports for the last 3 winters, I said. Beside them, pull the Thornwall provisioning logs. I want to know where the warm weather allowances are actually going. He came back to me in an hour with a face that had found something it had not expected to find. The Outer Wolves had been receiving additional provisions, not lavishly, not in amounts that would have set off any formal audit, but consistently. Extra dried ration packs in the cold months, supplemental broth stock, a standing order for grain that had been quietly folded into the general supply order so that it read, in any casual review, as ordinary restocking. Someone had found a way to route those provisions without raising a separate line item, which was why my steward had flagged the discrepancy only as a rounding error. The amounts were small enough to be invisible individually. Together, across 3 years, they were the reason the Outer Wolves on the Eastern Circuit had better cold-weather survival numbers than any comparable post in the territory. I asked who had placed the standing grain order. My marshal found it in the procurement log after 20 minutes of searching. It had been placed by a packhouse keeper, 3rd tier, no designated specialty. Her name was in the small, unhurried script I recognized from the provisions workroom. I watched her work through the afternoon without her knowing. This is not as simple as it sounds. A king who wants to observe without being observed in his own territory faces a particular difficulty. People recognize him. I solved this by doing what I had found most useful in 17 years of rule. I stood in the background and looked like someone who was meant to be there, and most people, occupied with their own work, do not look twice at a person who appears to belong. She was in the courtyard garden in the early afternoon, cataloging the winter stores. Not a task, I thought, that fell under hearth tending or hall preparation. She had a small wooden board with a sheet of paper pinned to it, and she was moving through the root cellar entrance methodically, counting, noting. She paused at one point, looked at what she had written, and then looked back at the cellar with the expression of someone who has found that the number and the fact do not match. Then she went back in and counted again. When she came out the second time, she made a mark on the paper and wrote something beside it. I suspected a question, or a flag, for whoever managed this section of inventory. She did not seem irritated. She seemed, in the patient way of someone who has long since made peace with the fact that work takes the time it takes, like a person finishing a sentence. My wolf was still quiet. I had stopped expecting it to surge or pull toward her. It was not doing that thing. It was doing the other thing, the thing I did not have a name for, the clean burn without wind. I had begun, over the course of the day, to understand that the stillness was not absence. It was recognition. My wolf was not waiting for something to happen. It had already identified what it was looking at. In 17 years, it had not done that before. I ate in the hall at the common table that evening, which surprised the warden considerably. He had prepared a separate room for my use. I told him I preferred the hall. What I did not tell him was that I wanted to see who remained when the others left. Most of the hall staff finished at the 8th hour and went to their quarters. The Outer Wolves who came off the Eastern Circuit came in tired, ate without much conversation, and went to their bunks. The warden retired. His assistant retired. The 2 hearth tenders went around the hall banking the main fires, and then they too were gone. The east corridor lamp came on. I waited 20 minutes to be certain everyone else was settled, and then I walked the corridor again. The workroom door was open this time. She had a different ledger, the Outer Wolves provisioning records, I thought, from the size and binding. She was cross-referencing it against something in a smaller notebook she had made herself, judging by the irregular pages and the stitched binding. Her mug was steaming this time. She had remembered to get it warm before sitting down. I stepped into the doorway. She heard me this time. She turned her head without alarm, not the startled flinch of someone caught at something forbidden, but the calm half-turn of someone interrupted at a task, and then she saw me properly and went still. I watched her recognize what she was looking at. The process was quiet. She took in the length of my cloak, the mark at my collar, the way I was standing, and she reached the correct conclusion without apparent panic. What came across her face was not fear. It was, for a moment, a specific sort of composure, the kind that takes some effort to maintain, and that she was maintaining it suggested it was not new to her. "My lord," she said, her voice was even. "Don't stop on my account," I said. She looked at me for a moment, then she looked back at the ledger. "I was going to stop soon regardless," she said. This column won't resolve tonight. Why not? Because the discrepancy is in a line item from the third month of last year, and I don't have access to the original procurement receipt. I've flagged it. She turned to show me the paper at the ledger's edge, a small tag neatly written. Someone with the right clearance will need to pull it. I looked at the tag. The someone she meant was the warden or his assistant or some administrative officer above her tier. Has this flag been here long? I said. 6 weeks, she said without inflection. I looked at her. She met my eyes with the equanimity of someone who has learned not to expect urgency from the people above her and has stopped finding it surprising. My lord, she said carefully, may I ask, are you here for the audit? I am. She nodded slowly. Then you'll have the clearance for the third-month receipt. I will, I said. I'll have it pulled in the morning. She made a small sound of acknowledgement and turned back to the ledger. Not dismissively. She was not the kind of person who dismissed anyone. I was beginning to understand. She simply returned to the work because the work was there, and because she did not allow the presence of a king in her doorway to persuade her that the column would resolve itself if she stopped looking at it. I watched her work for another moment. Then I said, the broth at the gate alcove. Her pen did not stop moving. The outer wolves come in cold from the circuit, she said. That was not a question. I know, she said. The standing grain order, I said. The supplemental ration packs in the cold months. The pen stopped. She turned to look at me. That is from the general supply line, she said. The amounts are within standard variance. I did not exceed. I know, I said. I've seen the figures. I spent this afternoon with my logistics marshal going through 3 years of provisioning records. I paused. No one flagged it because you were careful to keep it below the threshold that would require a separate line item. She held my gaze. In her eyes, there was no performance of innocence and no performance of guilt. She looked like someone who had done a thing because it needed doing and is prepared to account for it. The outer wolves on your eastern circuit have the lowest cold weather loss rates in the territory, I said, for 3 consecutive winters. They work very hard, she said. They do, I agreed. And someone has been making certain they have warm food when they come in and sufficient ration stock to carry them through the worst weeks. I paused. The warden's reports do not mention this. The warden does not know, she said simply. Why not? She seemed to consider this question with some care. Because if I had asked permission, she said, I would have been told it was not my responsibility, and then no one would have done it, and the outer wolves would have continued coming in cold. She turned to look at the ledger again. The numbers said it was possible. So I found the way. I stood in the doorway of the back workroom of a mid-territory packhouse at the close of the second evening, and I looked at this woman with no rank and no wolf who had spent 3 years quietly keeping other people's wolves alive through the cold months, because the numbers had said it was possible, and because no one else was going to do it. My wolf burned steadily in its stillness. The mark rose on her wrist. I saw it before she did, a pale warmth at the inside of her left wrist, just below the cuff of her sleeve, the kind of light that does not come from the lamp. She felt it a moment later. She looked down. She looked at it for a long moment with the same expression she had worn for the column that would not resolve, careful attention, readiness to account for what she found. Then she looked up at me. I did not move from the doorway. That has not happened before, she said. Her voice was even. No, I said. Is this? She looked at the mark again, and then at me, and her composure was steady, but she was thinking quickly. I could see it. Is this yours to account for or mine? Both, I said. In the morning, if you will allow it. She was quiet for a moment. I will allow it, she said. Then she turned back to the ledger, and the pen moved again, and I walked back up the corridor to my room with my wolf burning clean and still and certain, and I did not sleep for a long time. The council arrived at Thornwall at the 7th hour. 3 of my marshal tier, logistics, supply audit, Eastern Circuit oversight, and the Thornwall warden, who had dressed carefully and arranged himself behind the hall table with the expression of a man who expects a difficult morning and has prepared remarks. His assistant stood to his left. 2 scribes at the end of the table. A room full of people who had come expecting a discrepancy audit and had not been told anything else. I arrived last, which is my habit. I took the chair at the head of the table and let them settle. The warden opened, as I had expected. He had prepared a review of the provisioning figures, a defense of the supply management protocols, and a technical account of why the rounding discrepancy was not a meaningful deviation. He spoke for 4 minutes. He was competent. He was also entirely unaware of what he did not know. When he paused for breath, I said, "Thank you. We'll begin differently, I think." He stopped. I looked at the doorway. Wren stood in it. I had asked her to come at the 7th hour, and I had not told her why, only that she should come to the hall. And she had appeared in the doorway at exactly the 7th hour in her plain packhouse keepers, clothing with her hands quiet at her sides, and her face carrying that specific composure, the kind that is the product of 3 years of being overlooked, and has become, by now, simply the way she moves through the world. I said, "Come in." She came in and stood at the table's side, not behind anyone, not in the back of the room. Standing, as I had not specified whether she should sit or stand, and she had chosen to be level with the people in the room rather than subordinate to them. I noticed this. I said to the room, "The provisioning discrepancy in the Eastern Circuit audit is not a clerical error and is not a rounding variance. It is the record of 3 years of supplemental provisioning that has been sustaining the cold weather welfare of the outer wolves on the Eastern Circuit, and that has not been appearing in the warden's reports because the person responsible for it did not go through the warden to arrange it." The warden turned to look at Wren. "The provisioning was managed within the legitimate supply variance," I said before he could speak. "The methods were sound. The results are documented. 3 consecutive years of the best cold weather loss numbers in the territory." I paused. "The problem is not what was done. The problem is what was not seen." The warden's expression moved through several stages. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had not looked carefully enough at what was happening in the back workroom after the 9th hour. "My lords," he began, "the outer wolves on your circuit have been coming in cold to warm food and adequate ration because someone at the 3rd-tier packhouse level found the way to arrange it when no one asked her to," I said. "That is worth naming." I looked at Wren. "It is also worth considerably more than a 3rd-tier posting with no designated specialty." Wren met my eyes. Her wrist, I knew, had the mark on it. She had tucked her sleeve down this morning, not to conceal it from me, I thought, but because it was not the business of the room until I chose to make it so. She had understood from last night's exchange that there was a proper order to things and that I would observe it. "Her name is Wren," I said to the table. "As of this morning, she is under my direct recognition as a ward of the Alpha King's house, pending formal bond proceedings. She will not return to a 3rd-tier posting." I looked at the warden. "The ledger flag she placed 6 weeks ago, the 3rd-month procurement receipt, will be pulled and the discrepancy resolved today." The warden said in a careful voice, "Yes, my lord." I looked at Wren. "Is there anything in the column that won't wait?" I said. "The East Wing broth stock will need restocking before the end of the week," she said. "The outer wolves on the northern leg of the circuit come in Friday." "My logistics marshal will arrange it," I said. She gave a small nod, the kind of nod that means, "Understood, it will be done, I am glad." The rest of the morning proceeded. Figures were reviewed. Receipts were pulled. The 3rd-month discrepancy was resolved in an hour and a half. It had been a misattributed transfer code, exactly as Wren had flagged, and the correction required a single administrative note. The warden made the note himself, and I watched him make it. And I saw in his expression the particular discomfort of a man who understands that the most important record-keeping in his packhouse has been happening without him, at the 10th hour, by someone he had never considered. He did not say anything further. There was nothing to say that would improve his position, and he was sensible enough to know it. At mid-morning, the council filed out to their various tasks, and the hall emptied. Wren moved to follow, and I said her name. She stopped and turned. We were alone in the hall. I said, "The mark on your wrist." She turned her cuff back. The bond mark was there in the morning light, quiet, warm, the color of an ember in a well-banked hearth. "You said yes last night," I said. "I said I would allow it," she corrected, with the precision of someone who is careful about what she actually said. "That is not quite the same thing." "No," I agreed. "It is not, which is why I'm asking now properly." I looked at her. Will you come with me to Aldenmore when this audit is done? We will do this correctly, all of it in the right order at the right pace. She looked at me for a moment. She looked at the mark on her wrist. Then she said, the right pace. Yes, I said, whatever pace is right for you. She was quiet. Then yes, she said, I will come. We did not leave Thornwall for another 3 days. There was work to finish. She finished it, the provisioning ledgers brought fully current, the cold weather supply orders confirmed through the end of winter, the gate alcove stocked for Friday's outer wolves. She did it without being asked to continue and without any performance of thoroughness. She simply did not leave a thing undone because she was leaving. I spent those 3 days in the way I always spend time at a posting I have come to see properly for the first time. Reading the record of what has actually been happening in the spaces the formal reports don't reach, and understanding what it means. In Thornwall's case, the record was largely contained in the margin notes of 3 years of ledgers, and in the cold weather loss numbers that did not add up until you found the person who had refused to let them. On the second afternoon, I found her in the East Corridor, checking the hearth banks before handing the task to the hall tender she had trained through the autumn. I stood at the end of the corridor and watched her explain, to a young hall tender who was writing everything down with great concentration, exactly how deep the bank needed to be to hold through the 4th hour of the morning, and why the third hearth ran hotter than the others and needed watching in the cold months. She was not hurrying, she was not simplifying. She was giving the information as it actually was, in full, because the outer wolves would come in from the circuit on Friday, and it would be cold, and the hearths would need to be right. My wolf was still. On the third evening, after she had eaten in the hall and was crossing the courtyard toward the provisions workroom out of habit, there was always, I had learned, something she wanted to check one last time before she slept. I caught up with her at the workroom door. She looked at me. It can wait, I said. It's only a moment, she said. I know, I said, I'll wait. She went in, she checked the column. She made one small mark, she came out. We stood in the workroom doorway in the lamplight. I placed my hand over hers on the open ledger page. The ember warmth of the bond mark passed between our wrists, not a flare, not a surge, nothing that asked to be named or witnessed. It was simply there as it had been from the second evening, steady, certain, the way a fire burns when the wind has stopped. She looked down at our hands. The column resolved, she said. Good, I said. She closed the ledger. The lamp stayed lit. I brought her to Aldenmore in the 4th week of winter, when the snow had closed the supply roads behind us, and Thornwall was 3 days behind. There are things that take time and things that do not. The bond does not take time, it is or it isn't, and it had been from the moment I stood in a doorway and my wolf went quiet. But the rest of it, the formal recognition, the council acknowledgement, the slow and patient learning of what it means to stand beside someone who has spent 3 years being invisible and is still deciding what it means to be seen, that takes all the time it requires. She gave me that time without making a ceremony of it. She simply moved through each thing as it came. The presentation to my council, which she received with the composure I had learned to recognize as her native register. The moment in the great hall when my senior marshal, who had spent 2 decades watching kings, and could tell the difference between a political arrangement and a destined bond, gave her a small, deliberate bow that had nothing formal in it and everything genuine. The morning she came into the supply chamber with a proposed revision to the Eastern Circuit provisioning system, and laid it on the table in front of my logistics staff, and waited for them to engage with it. They engaged with it. The revision was implemented before spring. What I remember most from those early months is not any single ceremony or declaration. It is the evenings when the administrative work of the kingdom had quieted, and she was at the long table in the map room, working on whatever needed working on, her small, unhurried script moving across the page. Her mug this time kept warm because someone had finally thought to keep it warm for her, and my wolf was still in that clean, certain way, burning without any wind to trouble it. She had been doing the necessary work in the back rooms of the world for 3 years before anyone with the rank to see it had thought to look. When I look back now, what I see is not a king who found his fated mate by fortune. I see a woman who was already, in every way that mattered, doing the work of a queen, quietly, without audience, Because the outer wolves needed to come in from the cold, and someone had to care about that. It took me arriving unannounced at the 10th hour of a winter evening to discover it. I have not stopped being grateful that the numbers did not add up.